7:34 on this Saturday morning. Thanks so much for joining us today. This was a story that made news headlines this past week, and it looks at Vancouver schools and seismic upgrades and what could be happening in the next 14 years, and if that will include any closure or repurposing of Vancouver schools. And joining us to talk a bit more about this is Patty Backus, a Vancouver School Board trustee. Patty Backus, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me on your show, Jill.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the staff report. I know it hasn't been voted on or approved at this point. What exactly is it looking at?
Well, the Ministry of Education, if you go back to 2005, government announced a commitment to upgrade all seismically at-risk BC schools by 2020. And we have been trying to get through this program and upgrade all of Vancouver's seismically high-risk schools. And really the majority of the high-risk schools, probably the most of them, are in Vancouver. And so we have done about 20 schools, but we have almost 60 more to go. So this is a huge challenge. It's turned out to be more complicated and more expensive, I think, than the school board or the government ever anticipated. It has been much slower progressing than I think anyone would hope. I think everyone agrees we need to get these schools made safe and get kids into safe schools. Where the challenge is in the funding. The province is the funder, and the school board has to submit requests for funding. As we're about 10 years into the program, we're finding a point where government has said, look, we're not going to fund any more projects until we see the Vancouver School Board has a plan to be at least 95% average capacity across the district. And currently we're just under 85%. So they want us to demonstrate how we could be at 95% and use up the space, that we have the excess space, before we can proceed even on projects that are already well into planning and for schools that are full. So we haven't been asking for seismic upgrades for half-full schools. We've been proceeding with the ones with the most kids in them. So we're in we've been given this ultimatum. So staff have been working for some time on a very complex report showing that over a 15-year period, how we would go about upgrading all of these schools, where we would put the students during the upgrades, because one of the many changes to funding that have come in recent years is they won't fund the portables anymore that we had been using on many projects to put kids in while their buildings are being upgraded. So we have to look at finding space in our existing school stock, and that would mean in some cases closing schools to local enrollment and using them for temporary accommodation. So they're looking at about 8 schools for temporary, what they call swing space during upgrades, but also possibly another 11 or 12 school closures, including possibly a high school or 2. So this is really quite dramatic in terms of what the potential impact is on the city. And we know that where we have the most surplus space tends to be on the east side of Vancouver. So it's concentrated in one half of the city and not in the other. And it's creating some real challenges in terms of what would happen to these communities, which schools might close, how would we decide that, and how would we proceed to get these buildings upgraded. So all of the pieces of this plan, and it really is a plan that lays out a strategy for getting there, some of the criteria that the board would look at in terms of prioritizing schools for seismic upgrades, potentially considering others for temporary swing space, and then what we would be looking at if we were to proceed with actually closing schools.
And when you say that too, and looking at the city, like you said, a lot of the vacancy is on the east side, where we're seeing the exact opposite, say the Olympic Village area, the downtown area. Looking at it as tough a decision as it is, though, to close schools, does it not make sense if a school's not being utilized, if it's not at capacity, then maybe the students could go to other existing schools and you could raise capacity there?
Well, that's certainly what this plan is proposing, and I should say this plan does go to the board tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for a vote. And yes, I mean, one of the challenges is there are parts of the city where we need new schools, and we have actually been adding some schools. We've built new schools out at UBC. We are currently building a new school downtown, and we see parts of the city, like as you said, Olympic Village, and actually downtown still needs more capacity. It's bursting there, the schools. So government is saying to us, don't come and ask to add more space when your enrollment has actually been declining. And I think that's a reasonable position. However, holding up all of the seismic projects, I would argue that should not have been held up for this process. So we do have some difficult decisions facing us for sure. And I certainly hear from parents that they want their schools upgraded. They're tired of this dragging out of this program when we have earthquakes and warnings coming to us fairly frequently, in parts of the world, that we do need to move on with this. So this is going to be difficult. Where we're having a real challenge is the government's demand of 95% as a target. That is not a level that we have ever been advised is an optimal place to be running a pretty complex school system where there can be changes and fluctuations in growth in different parts of the city. We think it would create very tight, very pressured conditions. It would mean losing a lot of space that schools currently now are able to use for things like perhaps an art program or a music program or a special education program. In some cases, those classes are considered empty space by government. They're very particular about what they consider space that's used, and it's quite different from the reality in schools of how they use their spaces.
Is that where we would see, because in this report, it says that 40 schools are at less than 75% full. Is that, do you think, a bit of a misleading number in that it includes space such as art program space and such?
Well, yes, absolutely. And when we looked at school closures 5 years ago, and we made a decision not to proceed, what we decided and our staff advised is to look at, instead of closing schools, look at which spaces we could use for other purposes. So, for example, one of the schools that was threatened with closure in 2010 was Carleton Elementary in East Vancouver. And since then, we have leased out 2 of the buildings on the site to Green Thumb Theatres, which actually came in and refurbished a heritage building. They did some upgrades, and they do their theater work and rehearsals there and have added some real vibrancy to the site. It's a very compatible partner for use. And so that takes the operating costs out of it. They actually did some capital improvements, and we thought that was a good way to repurpose a space. So it's not a drain on our operating budget, and it is available if there's growth down the road in 20 or 30 years. We haven't lost that. We have been exploring other options. We moved some programs that we used to have in leased space into where we had surplus space. So we had moved our Main Street Adult Education Center into Gladstone Secondary, where it uses 6 classrooms. And those are students age 16 and up who take Ministry of Education courses. Most of them are funded by the ministry, but they consider that empty surplus space. I don't know where we'd put it if we were operating the way the ministry seems to think the schools go. And other spaces we use for offices or other purposes in schools are often considered just empty space. And even in some case, child care centers, which we know Vancouver needs more of, not fewer of.
We'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. You said tomorrow, but I think you meant Monday night. Is it Monday that
right.
you will vote?
Sorry.
It's okay. Day ahead. That's all right.
Early on Saturday. You're correct. Thank you for catching that. Yes, the meeting is Monday night, and it's a public meeting at the Vancouver School Board. All
right. We'll leave it there. Patty Backus, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jill. Take care.
That is Patty Backus with the Vancouver School Board. Again, we will see the vote on that plan on Monday night. We'll take a short break before we are back to check in with Mike Campbell.